with massive backlash.
Beijing's assistance to the Liberal Party,
Of China's interference in Canadian elections,
Justin Trudeau and the Chinese Communist government,
the Chinese Communist Party regime's interference.
I think the honey trap fits the MO of the Chinese.
all based on leaked information from anonymous intelligence officials.
Are you kidding me?
So I am telling you, you got to conduct an investigation. No doctor can make a medical diagnosis simply by looking at such a piece of paper. I'm saying that you must look at the medical reports and do a proper investigation. There's no question about it. Stop the bad science and do the right science. That's enough. Looks like you're trying to destroy evidence.
Ursula von der Leyen has a doctorate in medicine. Her maiden name is Albrecht, and her husband Heiko is medical director of Orgenesis, a U.S. biotech company specializing in gene therapies such as Pfizer and Moderna vaccines. She has been on its scientific council since 2019 and has held her position since September last year. Pfizer and Orgenesis have a very close relationship.
This week, a number of news outlets are reporting that the FDA is poised to do something that they hadn't anticipated doing. They're going to give another emergency use authorization to a second bivalent booster. So if you're keeping score at home, this means that an elderly person may now be eligible for 5 regular Wuhan vaccine doses and then 2 more bivalent doses, bringing the grand total to 7 doses of COVID-19 vaccine.
Dr. Plotkin, has there ever been a study which looked at the total health outcomes of children following the CDC's vaccination schedule and those who are completely unvaccinated, such as Faith?
Not that I'm aware of.
I don't know if it's far-fetched to ask, but Russian actor could be continuing to fuel things as this protest grows, but perhaps even instigating it from the outset.
So we've heard twice today that 20 million lives have been saved due to these mRNA injections. How exactly did you arrive at that number, and could you please share all the available documentation supporting this claim?
America has pissed off the rest of the world. We've been the bully with this thing. We're now a credit-based economy. In other words, we print fake money and we spread it throughout the world. But the rest of the world is actually producing the food, the gold, the silver, the machinery, and all this. So finally, the rest of the world said enough's enough. Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa. That was the original BRICS. And now they're gaining force.
People in the jails, they can hang them to their neck. Nothing gonna make any difference because they're just puppets. And you are putting your pressure on Trudeau. Oh, we need to get rid of Trudeau. He's just a puppet. They will bring some new hero tomorrow for you. So we need to be focused on our personal responsibilities. In past few hundred years, they make us lazy by creating the systems going to take care of you, planet, and everything, environment. You just do your job, make babies, and get to retire and enjoy your life. So as a human, we have responsibilities. That is our purpose. This earth, this universe is our home, and we have our duties. So we have to recognize those duties.
Let's get ready to spread 'em. So I guess I wanted to start with you. All that I've known about you is from your bio that you're a constitutional lawyer. How does one become a constitutional lawyer?
Well, actually, like if you're going to specialize in anything in law, it's just a decision to focus on it, right? Like if you wanted to become a real estate lawyer, you just start practicing that. And I never wanted to be a lawyer. And when I went to law school, the intention wasn't to be a lawyer. So I found myself, I was in undergraduate doing an honors degree in history. And my interest increasingly became kind of Canadian political history. And I became fascinated with, we represent ourselves as a democracy. And in Canada, you will notice in our education system, so I don't know how old you are, Jason, but I bet you at no point in your entire education or the media has anyone ever suggested that you actually read our Constitution.
That's right.
Okay?
That's right.
And when you read it, it's a little shocking on how clear it is that we're not a democracy, how much power the monarch has. I mean, literally almost absolute power over us. And even the idea that our Constitution is just a collection of statutes of the British Parliament, right down to our charter. That's just part of the Constitution Act 1982, which is a British statute. So I actually became fascinated with the social underpinnings of the British North America Act, which is our main body of our Constitution that came out in 1867. So I had been accepted for a master's at University of Ottawa under the person I wanted to study under, great funding and everything, to go and do a master's in this and a PhD in this. And this would have been 1989. Like that's back in the day when there were no jobs in the humanities because the baby boomers sat on them. And when jobs did come up, they didn't go to white men because there were so many white men there, and we were trying to get gender and racial equality in the teaching. And we can all agree that's a great idea. But when it means you're not going to get a job, it becomes a factor in your decision making. So actually, it was a professor who had kind of just assumed a mentor role with me, sat me down one day and he said, okay, you're going to go and do this master's, you're going to do your PhD. You'll actually get through. Like you'll be one of the few, like remember then they just didn't grant PhDs in the humanities because there were no jobs. Like people used to write books on it. It was so awful. But he says, you'll get through. And he says, what are you going to do then? He says, you're not going to get a job as a university professor. You're like a white male. Like it's just not going to happen. And that got me thinking, oh, I would hate to go through all that work and then just, basically be flipping burgers with a big debt load. So I thought, why don't I go to law school, then do a master's in law, focusing on the exact same issue, the social underpinnings of the British North America Act, and then get a job in a law school. There's way less competition to get a job in a law school than, in the humanities. And they actually, had made more progress on the gender and racial equality thing, so less worries that way, right? So I wrote the last LSAT you could to get into law school, the December one. In fact, it was too late for like schools out east like U of T and Osgoode and that. But U of Vic poached me anyway. They said, well, you come out and check out our facilities, and it's pretty hard when you see it.
Oh yeah, why is that?
Well, just so the Faculty of Law at University of Victoria has its own little building, and just the campus and everything. And then it was red carpet, like they really wanted me to go there. And then when you realize, like, my favorite season in Victoria was kind of mid-February to late March, because that's when the cherry trees are in full blossom.
Yeah.
And it's just great. Like I don't regret going there for for law school. So I switched gears, went to law school with the intention of becoming, a law professor and focusing on constitutional law. And at the time, so I went to law school in 1990. We were having this transition into the woke culture, and the law schools were one of the first.
Yeah.
And the amount of hatred in the law school faculty, like they were all warring. And I thought, I don't want to devote my career to be working in an environment that's toxic, because we're going through a philosophical change. And so I found myself, I'd been in university for 10 years. I had a son. It was time to work. So never intending on being a lawyer, I ended up practicing law. And I loathe conflict. I avoid conflict at all costs in my personal
me too.
life. The only thing I found attractive in law was actually defending our rights.
Yeah.
So you end up in criminal law right away. And then, I ended up, because of my interest in constitutional, segueing into protecting health rights, but also largely in a criminal context. So when Health Canada would be charging, herbalists or companies, or basically providing natural treatments, because back then the whole industry was illegal. Our drug regulations, so our Food and Drug Act and drug regulations aren't there for health purposes. So the federal government doesn't have jurisdiction over health. So it's largely a criminal law act, and also some sections dealing with international trade, which are two powers the federal government does have. And you won't find in the Food and Drug Act or regulations anything about Health Canada protecting health, or even seeking good public health outcomes, or acting in the public interest at all, because it's not. It's largely about criminal law. So we've criminalized all treatments. So this is actually an important kind of philosophical thing to explain, and then I'll just say I was attracted to resisting this, right?
Okay.
So, and this is all captured by Big Pharma actually in the 30s. So what we've done is we've basically criminalized all treatments. So Jason, let's say you and I go for a long hike, in the Kamloops area in summer, and it's 40 degrees up, and you didn't bring enough water, and we're trying to make our way back, and I see this guy is dehydrated. He's in trouble, and I got water, and I said, Jason, have some of this water. It's going to help with your dehydration. I've just broken the law.
Right.
Because I did not apply to Health Canada and prove to them that water will work for dehydration and prove that it's safe, and get their permission to make that claim, and and actually have my my home water system, the taps checked, and that, so that the facility for which I filled up my canteen was approved, and I had the appropriate site license to be able to put that water in the canteen. There's a whole range of things I've just violated, but the basic premise is we've made it illegal to use anything for a therapeutic purpose. And only those things for which people have gone through a rigorous process and gotten Health Canada approval have the privilege to offer them, which is quite fantastic. People might agree that if you're going to introduce a novel chemical as a therapeutic drug, because that's such a risky endeavor, maybe that should be regulated criminally, and maybe there should be strict requirements before that's allowed because of the risk.
That's what everyone thinks Health Canada is doing.
Oh, well, I know, and that's the trouble, because that's the public propaganda that they put forward. If I can tell you a cute story, is I believe that too. It actually, you have to, because you just assume, well, Health Canada is there for our health. Why are they called Health Canada? Department of Health.
Yeah.
like in my mind, I think of them as Death Canada, because we would have way fewer deaths and better health outcomes if they didn't exist, and we demolished their buildings in tiny pasture, and basically made it where you couldn't even go.
Yeah.
Maybe do tours of the sites. But I had a case where they were going after a company called True Hope for selling their product EM Power Plus, and this is back when there were no regulations, so they could target any company they wanted. Like back to 2004, we didn't have regulations.
Regulations on whose side?
On natural health products. So if you walked into a health food store in 2004, everything was technically illegal.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So when you say we didn't have regulations, it's kind of like,
probably took us like 12 to 15 years for most of the products to become regulated.
Right.
So like even in the recent past, if you walked into a health food store, like maybe half of the products there were unregulated. Did any of us feel unsafe?
Yeah. No.
Do you know that as Canadians, and this is using Canadian government statistics,
Yeah.
as a Canadian, and it's funny, as a Canadian, you're more likely to be bitten by a shark than harmed by a natural health product.
Right.
Yeah, and some Canadians each year do get bitten by sharks, by the way.
Yeah.
And if I was to ask your audience, like, let's get serious here. I actually want you to participate in this exercise. Get a pad of paper and pen right now.
Yeah.
And I want honest to God. Like, let's not play games here. You get honest about this. I want you to list every freedom that you would be willing to sacrifice and give up so that the government could protect you from being struck by lightning. No one would write anything down, but you are 14 times more likely to be struck by lightning than to be harmed by a natural health product.
Yeah.
So when we create this legal environment saying everything is illegal, using the criminal law power, again, it might be appropriate for novel chemicals, but when we're talking about natural remedies which just do not create risk, I mean, when you're 14 times more likely to be struck by lightning than to be killed by a natural health product. And by the way, I know somebody who was struck and killed by lightning. It does happen, but you're
in
rare.
Alberta, so
it would happen when I was living in Saskatchewan, but
close enough.
But it does happen, but it's such a low risk that, I mean, you're like roughly like 450 times. Actually, no, it's 428 times more likely to be killed riding a bicycle than to be, killed by a natural health product. Like, and I'm sorry, you're not going to give up a single freedom to not ride a bike.
Yeah.
Like why do we even talk risk? It's so meaningless. And yet we're always told and the purpose of making them as illegal is to protect us from the risk. And Health Canada is very aggressive at driving natural products off the market, and they don't take into account the health risk of removing products. I mean, it won't be an answer to your question, so I'll just leave it, but I could give you examples where there's no question that taking the natural product off the market would cause death, including a court case where the court found Health Canada caused deaths as a finding of fact for restricting a product for a short period of time. So I now even totally forget where I was going.
Oh, that's fine. Yeah, this
I mean,
kind of where I hope to get to. It's good. This is the thing that I butt up against all the time, is that, I mean, basically we're talking about plants. Health medicines, we're talking about plants, we're talking about things that grow on God's green earth, and these are all illegal.
Yeah. So we're talking about kind of how I got involved in protecting health rights. So, and just the problem is philosophically we have capture, and when you think about it from a personal sovereignty perspective, that has to be our most fundamental right as to how we treat our bodies. I mean, Jason, if you get sick, you are going to have a personal experience with that sickness. None of us can share it. I mean, you can tell us you feel awful and you can describe your symptoms, but I mean, you're the one having that experience.
Yeah.
And, you know, I imagine some of the people that will watch this, when I say, I mean, there have been a few times in my life where I've been under so much pain that I actually understand those people that want to take their lives because they can't take the constant pain. It is a deeply personal thing. Like our suffering when our body is, you know, in distress is a deeply personal thing. And how can it be that we would allow anyone to tell us that we can't choose how we're going to address illness or to prevent illness and stay healthy? Like the minute we allow the government there, I mean, we're in slave territory. Like, I mean, I know I've spoken about that in the context of these coerced vaccines. Regardless of what you feel about the vaccine, the idea that we would coerce people to take any medical treatment is quite fantastic from a fundamental rights issue. And there's only one segment of the human population in history that has not had the right to choose whether or not they have access to a medical treatment, and that's slaves.
Yeah.
I mean, this is fundamental. And maybe what has been revealed to us, one of the things through what we've just experienced over the last 3 years, is maybe it's got people thinking about rights again and personal sovereignty. Because again, you know, even if you agreed with the vaccination campaign and getting the vaccine, and you know, and even if you kind of got caught up in more hype than you should have and you realized, you know, you were jacked up emotionally, there's probably a lot of people out there that are still uncomfortable, deeply uncomfortable with the idea that, you know, have I lost my right to refuse now? Like, what happens if you know, I supported this one, but does that mean if there's a treatment that the government wants me to take or my children to take that I disagree with, that I've now lost that right? Because you may have. We set the precedent. Do you see how dangerous this is? Like, so I'm speaking about, because we all know that a large segment of the Canadian population truly and sincerely believed that getting the COVID vaccine was a tremendous idea. And it was a tremendous idea for their children if they were parents. And actually would encourage other, you know, wider family members and friends, you do this. Well, that's all fine and good when you think this treatment is a good idea. But, you know, you've now set a precedent where basically it's okay for not just the government to try and coerce people into taking a treatment, but employers. And I mean, the social pressure. I mean, we those of you that watch the National Citizens Inquiry, and people speaking about the social pressure as actually being one of the largest factors where they didn't want to take the vaccine, but, you know, were eventually coerced into doing it. So what about the next treatment then? I mean, Canada right now is negotiating a treaty. It's not called a treaty, but it would be binding on us like a treaty. So let's call it for what it is. And they're changing the international health regulations at the WHO, basically removing, and it was James Corbett where I learned this when he was testifying at the National Citizens Inquiry, and when I was preparing him as a witness, they were basically, so they're removing those parts of the health regulations that give humans sovereignty over their own bodies, and basically putting us in a situation nationally where they can dictate health solutions to countries that will be binding. So we're moving into a world based on this precedent where treatments may be dictated to us. And how are you going to feel when you think it's a treatment that could harm your kids and you now don't have a choice? Like, regardless of what your thoughts were with what just happened, we have now created a precedent that basically takes away our fundamental sovereignty. And that should be concerning. And where does that lead? I mean, let's say the vaccine worked. Let's just hypothetically say, and I'm sorry, anyone who will objectively look at the evidence will be challenged by even my hypothetical. But let's say the vaccine worked and would have saved lives. It's still a bad idea to coerce people. A very, very bad idea. And that will lead to, ironically, worse health outcomes down the road.
You're summing up, I think, why people, I know people in my circle and generally the people that I got to meet at the NCI, the people I meet in my show and online and stuff. This is the first concern when these ideas were brought up about mandates. This is the first thing that pops to mind of people that have put a little bit of thought into what their freedoms are and how precious they are, as opposed to those who are just scared or kind of, I don't know, do what they're told. They don't think about this stuff. There's even, I feel, with a vast swath of the population, as you stated at the start, so ignorant of just the idea of constitutional freedoms or personal freedoms that they kind of hold them in disregard. They kind of look down on anyone who talks about this stuff. And I know that there have even been, government, federal government papers leaked out that say, here are the signs of a white supremacist terrorist. They talk about the Constitution a lot. And there's this kind of feeling amongst a vast chunk of the population that you don't need to think about that stuff. The experts have it all under control. Whereas when this thing came down, the very first thing on my mind and my co-host Rain were just immediately like, this is a giant control scam. That we can't have this. You can't mandate vaccines. You can't make us stay in our houses, because if we agree to it, it's all over. And that's the first thing that came to mind for us, because we've been thinking about this stuff for years. And for a lot of people, the people that are behind the convoy and into the NCI, this is the first thing we think about. And increasingly, I want to help the country become more like that. Like you said, no one talks about the Constitution in school. Let's start doing that.
Yeah, I think we have to start thinking more broadly, right? So, I mean, here we're just having a discussion about, what does it mean just from a philosophical precedent level when we accept that the government can literally dictate to us that we have to take treatments. I mean, I like to speak about, the ritual of showing your identity papers, because it's the same conversation is thinking, wait a minute, what are the long-term consequences of having to show identity papers to do anything? And let's just maybe talk about our children, right? Because one of the things that's really troubled me about us cowering in our homes and us being told to wear masks and doing it, and us segregating society, and regardless of the merits of that. But our children watched us for the first time being afraid of our government. I mean, why did most churches stay closed? Because they saw pastors being arrested. It came out this week or last week, and somebody just mentioned it to me earlier this morning, about a German doctor in Germany getting sentenced, I think, to 2.5 years for writing some exemptions during the COVID pandemic. And the first thought I had was, that's not about punishing the doctor. It's about making it clear to every other German doctor for when the next pandemic is forced on us, to make sure that no single German doctor will dare exempt anyone from what is being coerced upon the population, because they know now they'll go to jail. So when you see somebody like a German doctor being sentenced for something that happened years ago, when we're out of it and it shouldn't matter. And just
wow. So they had actual criminal code there?
I don't know. it came across my
Wow.
news feed, and then actually I was in another interview this morning, and the interviewer brought it up as an example, and to me it's an example for the other physicians for the next time. But let's go back to this identity papers ritual, and I'm just trying to introduce to your audience the idea that you kind of have to ask yourself, with things that are happening, actions of the government and our actions, what are the longer kind of precedent and philosophical ramifications? And so I was just bringing up about, our children watched us being afraid of the government. And, so now how, when we pass the torch to them and we're no longer the people that are the movers and shakers in our society, are they not now at a disadvantage? But let's talk about identity papers. And I know, Jason, you've heard me talk about this before, but some of your audience may not have it. And it's an important point. So let's go pre-COVID. You were free to go to your kid's hockey game. You were free to go to a restaurant. You did not have to do any task. You did not have to do anything to be able to go to your kid's hockey game or your restaurant. And it was a freedom. So you were free to do that. Now, one of the ironies with these vaccine passports, which really are identity papers, one of the ironies of this that I witnessed while we were in the middle of it was those people that had the passport and were able to go to their kid's hockey game or go to a restaurant when that section of the population that didn't have a passport were not able to do that. I actually saw some gloating online, right? It's like, well, we have these privileges, and they would use and language tells us the truth. What people say, it's the real truth sneaks out. And privileges is a dirty word in this context. But they were basically communicating, well, we have these privileges and you don't. Like there was some gloating, right? Because remember, we had all this social pressure. And so if you were in the category that was vaccinated, which was the category that had these privileges, you might have even been gloating with good intentions to basically put pressure on those that didn't have these privileges, right? So I'm not even meaning that it necessarily was mean intentioned, although I think certainly in many cases it was. Just because we've kind of fallen so far from actually loving each other. And I'm guilty as everyone else, right? Like we're just so egocentrical that we lose perspective very easily. So, but anyway, they didn't understand the joke was on them. That now if we look at it today of actually what you had to do, this was one of those cases where those people that didn't have passports and so didn't have these privileges are actually in a better situation today. Because when you have to go through the police state ritual of showing your identity papers, you actually fail to realize it's not about the government getting information on you. They could care less about that. It's a ritual to reinforce that you are no longer free. Because before, you could just go to your kid's hockey game or you could just go to the restaurant. But now you're not free to do that. So do you understand? You were free.
Yes. Daddy, may I go to here? May I go there?
You weren't free. You have to go through a police state ritual to be granted the privilege. So you have to show your identity papers, and then it reinforces in your mind that you are the slave. You don't have the right to do this. You have to go through this ritual, and then the state grants you permission. The state grants you the privilege. It's not a right anymore. It's a privilege. I mean, I use the example of, Stalinist Russia and Nazi Germany when they would have roadblocks in cities.
Yeah.
Do you really think they cared to know you were leaving one district to another? Because they knew where you lived. They know where you're going home for supper. They know where you're sleeping that night. If they want to arrest you in the middle of the night, they know where you are. it's about the ritual because it makes you subservient. You have to do this to be granted the privilege. And here we're being told that we're going to bring in digital IDs in Canada. Do you know big box stores like SuperSpreaders, an example in Alberta, they put turnstiles. So you go in the entrance and you have to go through this turnstile. Now, it's not a locking turnstile, but why are they doing that? They're doing that so that when it is a locking turnstile and we have to show our digital ID to get access to the store, that we're already accustomed to the turnstile.
Oh, wow. So like getting on the subway?
They have to do this slowly. So if it's not,
like a subway turnstile that'll lock and keep
you out.
You
The ones, you know, with the gates that go like this.
Right. Wow.
So it's a softer
and those are installed
like
already.
The Canadian Tire where I live, they have that one, you know, where you kind of have to walk through. It's got the 3 metal things and it turns. But the Superstore, and it just happened last year. Why would a store do that? It's not blocking you access. It costs money. It makes the store less friendly. But the reason why they're doing it is so that when they're locking ones, you're already, when you're coming in, you're expecting the turnstile. So it's not so much of a shock. Like, can you imagine coming into a store and just out of the blue, now there's a locking one, you have to go through this police state ritual of showing the identity papers. But the point is that you had to go through this ritual, and the joke was on you, those of you that gloated, you had more. No, you actually were in the unfortunate position without paying attention to the meaning. You had your children watch you go through a police state ritual and normalize a police state ritual. You were reinforcing not only in your mind subconsciously, but your children's minds, that you weren't free to go to the restaurant, that you had to have the state that you were afraid of grant you the privilege. And how do we undo that for your children that watched you participate in this humiliation of demonstrating to the entire world and your children that you were not free in Canada to go to a restaurant? How do we undo that?
Yeah, well, there's the big question, right? You hit the nail on the head. It wasn't about going to the restaurant. It wasn't even about COVID. It was about solidifying this new procedure where we bypass everything that we thought we had for freedoms to whatever degree we have them in Canada, I guess is debatable, but you know, the what we think are our charter rights and the Bill of Rights, they're doing a ritual with us, and we were agreeing to partake in completely bypassing the freedoms that we are supposed to have. And the government's like, yay, it worked. Cool. What can we do with this? And I what's coming next? I live in fear.
Well, no, but don't. Like,
what they're gonna.
I mean, I've been clear when I've been doing the NCI openings and stuff like that. We have to prepare. I mean, I think now it's not even enough to have food, for example, and other things that are going to be important. I think you have to have it hidden. So, you know, some out in the open, so when they search your houses and take it, that you actually, you know, still have some. So, I mean, I think we've moved from the point where, yes, you have to have not emergency supplies, but long-term supplies. But you also have to have most of it hidden. It has to be difficult for the state to find. But, and I've been clear. I mean, I think that many of us are going to have to really pay a price, but we win. Like, God's not going to be thwarted here. And we saw him move. I saw him moving in a unexpected way with the NCI. That's what made it so magical to me. And even that we could be speaking about God like 3 years ago helped me out here. But so things have changed. And when we get our institutions back, we are going to create something really beautiful. So, I mean, we're going to pay a price to get there. But it's going to be beautiful because it's going to be based on human sovereignty. It's going to be based on treating each other how we want to be treated. So
Do we need to dump the monarchy?
Well, let me approach this with the Socratic method. So, Jason, what do you think about the idea that because of somebody's bloodline, they should have special rights and privileges and real significant power over you? Read our Constitution, and actually, basically be paid, a tribute. Do you think that's a good idea?
No, absolutely not. Well, it could work in some areas, but no. I mean, we want constitutional republic.
I don't know what we want, and it's interesting. I hope I get to participate on the other side on kind of figuring out the philosophical basis of some of our institutions. But I don't know what it looks like. I mean, our whole parliamentary system is designed to control us while we have the appearance that we have control. And and on some minor matters we do have control. And we can slow things down and we can stop them, but realistically we have so little control over our lives that it's crazy. And I mean, even just this idea that the state can make everything illegal as far as the therapeutic purpose, and has tremendous power and the ability to control us and take things away. We need criminal laws. Like, I mean, we do. You can't murder, you can't steal, you can't rape. Like, we all agree on that. But extending the criminal law into some other areas itself should be criminal. So I mean, I think the starting point is going to be kind of what are the philosophical foundations that we want to base our society on, and then flowing from there what it looks like. I don't know, because what happens with civilization is we reach a point where a system didn't work, but it had served us for a period of time, and then we come up with something new. So I mean, I think we might even come up with something new. I don't know what that looks like, but I don't want to limit myself to kind of systems of government we've already thought about.
Right. Might be something else.
I don't know. All I know is when we get to the other side of this, and we're not basing our society on control and greed, and putting ourselves in a situation where we're not caring for each other anymore and taking personal responsibility for each other, when we're not there anymore, and we're in a situation where we realize that didn't work, who knows what that's going to look like. But I think it's going to be very exciting.
It'd be a hell of a process. It's a hell of a thing to get out from underneath the monarchy.
You don't know that. I mean,
that's true. That's true. I don't know that. It seems like it's a hell of a thing.
We could have, and another thing is when it seems like it's an absolute crisis and the worst things have happened, and how are we going to get through this? We might look back and go, was that ever necessary, and was that ever helpful? Like, I think if we just worry about ourselves, so first of all, if we forget that we're an eternal being, and that we're a soul that's just happens to be in a body having an experience. So, if we forget that and we're actually worried about paying our mortgage and losing our natural health products and all of that, we can just be in total fear. But, even if we're kind of connected to the bigger picture, we can still, all these just bizarre and obnoxious things happening, and we just feel like the trapdoor's closing. We're not in control, but somebody is. And it's just, we can sometimes lose track of the bigger picture. Like, look at what you and I just experienced with the NCI. I mean, we all of a sudden, we're experiencing something bigger than ourselves, where this community is just coming together, which really had nothing to do with the witnesses, although that was the forum that was used for all of us just to kind of feel God's presence, that we're part of something bigger. Well, that hasn't stopped, right? I mean, the NCI is not holding hearings right now. It's trying to figure out its own way. But God hasn't stopped.
No.
And people starting to understand that they need to take personal responsibility for the state of our world. And people starting to realize, you know, I don't have to cower in fear. And I can get out of that state of mind. And people realizing, you know, yeah, we're past the point where getting this train back on the tracks is going to be painless. We're past that. But that's kind of freeing when you realize that. Okay, I'm going to have to pay a price. Like, whether I do something or not, now I'm paying a price, so I might as well do something. That actually, once you accept that you're willing to be punished and pay a price, it's actually freeing. Like, so I mean, so many cool, good things are happening, and we're better people when we're making choices. That no, actually, I disagree with that. I have to do something now. You're a better person, and you're thinking differently, and then you get the privilege of meeting people that are thinking the same way. And you know, some of the relationships we're building that's the best part.
Yeah, exactly. I was totally isolated for 2 years, pretty much, in a raving mad city with people with 18 masks on, and just like living in the lion's den, it felt like. And yeah, I got really isolated. Then to move to something like this, where it's like, oh, okay, wow, and especially that I got the 3 days here with all of you humans that I could actually touch and talk to. Yeah, I'm forever changed by it. And you're right. We've got to do something, though it's not us in control. We got to pay a price. I like this message. It gives me hope tendrils of feelings, because fear has been a big part of it. Even though, you know, the fear on my side during all this was very different, because I was defiant. I didn't believe any of it. But the fear is still there in what to do about it. What's going to happen to your career, socially, There's still a lot of other fears. Or what am I going to do about this? I know I've got like a couple ideas on the table about what I'm doing next, and your talk is helping me in that. I thank you for that.
Well, I thank you, Jason. I mean, you've helped me, and that's the whole point of this, right? It's, you know, it's almost like we're all being guided into meeting different people and networks. I mean, NCI has just been this whirlwind in my life for about 7 months, where I've had no life. I mean, even now, you know, my wife and I were going for walks again. We didn't have time, right? Like, I was totally getting out of shape and everything, because it's like, no, I actually don't have time to take an hour and go for a walk, right? Like, and you know, so that ends. I mean, I haven't even looked at my taxes yet, like, because everything else backs up, right?
Yeah.
Hope I don't owe too much, because, you know, there'll be penalties and interest and all that fun stuff.
Yeah, they might have a special little case file for you.
The NCI hearings stop, and Health Canada's has 2 big initiatives to take our natural health products away. And so I'm finding I'm having to, you know, kind of deal with that. And each one of us is just going to be kind of guided into what we need to do. Like, you know, we get at the NCI, like a lot of people, well, you know, what do we do? And, you know, what are you guys doing next? And always looking to us for guidance to tell them what to do. And that's missing the point. Like, we have been conditioned to rely on other people taking the responsibility. And so the government has taken that. You know, it's interesting. I was talking to one fellow kind of on a related subject, and he says, you know, I used to run a nonprofit or a charity that ran a crisis line. So you're suicidal and you 1-800, and it would go to volunteers who are trained to deal with that. And then he said, then the government stepped in and took it over and hired employees that weren't there because philosophically they wanted to help people. And now they're just following the government script. And I'm not saying they're not helpful, but he says, it changed, and it wasn't as good, and basically the soul left it. And that's very important for people who are suicidal, that love on the other end of the phone, right? So, but I just used it as an example of how our responsibility was taken away. You know, I talk about the second commandment a lot, about how we're supposed to love each other. Well, that is taking responsibility for each other. But then when the government steps in and then takes care of absolutely everything, we actually are trained then not to take self-responsibility for our brother. And that has segued into trying to solve this, you know, encroachment on our rights and literal enslavement of us. Is now we're looking to freedom groups to tell us what to do. And that tells me you haven't gotten out of the spell yet. It's fine for you to decide, I'm going to look and see what different freedom groups are suggesting I do as I enact my agency and take full responsibility to be doing this full time. My job's now just how I support myself. But I'm in a war, an information war, and I'm a soldier, because you are. But if you are looking to organizations and absolving your self-responsibility, you're still asleep, right? How can you not be doing things now? How can you be waiting for the NCI or any other freedom group to tell you what your role is? How is that possible, that you're in that situation where you would be waiting for somebody else to enact your personal agency? Do you see the problem here? So it's another thing we have to start thinking about, because if you're going to be sovereign, if you're going to have your own personal agency, that's you deciding what your role is. And your role may be, I mean, God's likely not going to tell you to reinvent the wheel. Maybe your role is, you know, I'm resonating with these 10 freedom groups, and I'm going to every day check and see if they have any new action plans. And when they tell me to write a letter to my MP, well, I'm going to do that weekly. I'm not going to just do it once. I am full-time on this. And I'm going to write every MP. I'll give 9 hours a day. Right? Like, it may be that you're looking for others. That's your decision. And, you know, that's okay. But I promise you, if you started doing that, then the ideas will start coming into your mind and you'll be guided to be doing slightly different things. And before you know it, you'll arrive and you'll know it, that you're exactly where you're supposed to be. But it actually starts with you taking action. So, so I'm not saying that God's going to make this difficult for you, but you can't be relying on others to tell you what your role is. That's not agency at all.
That's well put. That's well put. What do you think of well, a real kick I've been on lately is watching, it's huge in America, these guys that call themselves 1A or 4A auditors.
No, actually I haven't. So sure.
There's guys that go out and intentionally, I wouldn't say provoke, they'll go out and say, like, walk around the perimeter of a police station on public land, filming the police station to see what will happen. And then eventually the police will come out and be like, what the heck are you doing? Get out of here. You can't film us and stuff. And he can. And these guys make themselves expert in their state law and go out and dance around the edge of it. They never do anything violent or crazy, but stuff like that, just to see what the response will be. And they film this stuff, and then it's a huge scene down there. There's several channels that I follow. They have millions of subs, millions of views. And then I've maybe found 1 or 2 Canadians doing it. And of course, it's kind of boring and very small. What do you think of that? There's I want to show you, actually, because I think you might even enjoy watching this guy. Audit the Audit. Let's see. I'll put it on the screen here. This guy's fantastic. He takes these little clips that people have, but he'll pause it. Instead of showing it raw, he'll pause it and go through case law, state law, all this stuff very quickly, well broken down. You might really
Yeah,
enjoy it.
no, I
don't know
very
if you
well
like
might. And
law when you're on your off hours, but it's been highly motivational for me because I know I'm watching something happen in Ohio, and they're like, "Give us your ID." No, well then you're obstructing justice, and we're going to arrest you. And the guy's like, "No, I'm not." And then they go to the case law of that, and I'm watching this, going like, "Dang, what's the law in Ontario? How does that work in Ontario?" And I've since looked it up, and I've got some idea of now how that works better in my life. I think this is something that, not necessarily this, but it's the kind of focus that a lot of Canadians need, because we're clueless. We are absolutely clueless. We probably know more about American constitutional law than we do ourselves.
But you're raising a different issue with this group, nonviolent pushback, right? So, like, part of the problem is, I'm wrestling with what the colleges of physicians and surgeons in each province have done during COVID. Where basically, they took away the doctors' ability to be doctors and basically treat people for early COVID, for an example. So, like in Alberta, I mean, you would get professionally disciplined if you were treating early COVID. The expectation from your college is that you could only treat COVID when somebody, turned up with blue lips at the emergency ward. And I don't know how that happened. Like, I think it's coming out in the United States that basically there were funding grants. And so let's say a college accepted, a big millions of dollars as part of this funding grant, they would sign an agreement that they had to, follow this script, so to speak. And it likely was a binding contract. I don't know if that's what happened in Canada. I suspect it did, because how do you get all of these colleges, which, have physicians on their governing board, basically acting the way they did? So I'm hoping we get to the bottom of that. It's something that never came forward in the NCI, because likely nobody in Canada has followed that trail yet, the funding of the colleges and what grants and what conditions. But let's say that is the case. I mean, I think that, it would serve Canada well then that somebody has found that out and is calling the College of Physicians and Surgeons out. And what would have been wrong with peaceful pushback against the colleges, and basically each board member knowing that the public is outraged with what's going on, so that at least then they're faced with moral distress, that they understand they're hurting people and that people don't appreciate it. Because, I mean, a lot of these people, it's just like they hurt us, they cause death, they cause suffering, and there's no pushback. And I mean, peaceful pushback. But I mean, I think that, we have to stop. Just if we're down and getting kicked, it's okay for us to yell stop, isn't it? Like, so I don't know how all this looks, but I mean, I think there has to be, peaceful pushback.
Yeah. And that has to happen in a certain number for it to
we
really
all
get
have
noticed,
to do it,
right?
I mean, and this is, why, like, I mean, like, you can use the freedom groups, to help some actions you can take, but try and figure out your own niche, like, and it'll happen. Like, so first of all, just get active, and then you'll slowly just find yourself where you're supposed to be.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's been quite a journey for me. I mean, my co-host Rain and I, we just started grumbling on YouTube right when COVID hit, just because we knew we had to do something, and maybe some people would enjoy our theories about the whole thing. And then the convoy happened, and now NCI's happened, and it's all just been this rather, I wouldn't say explosive growth, but exponential growth to a point now where we're in a position to reach people and do things. And my skills I've connected with many people on our side of the debates, on the freedom side of things. I'm getting to use my skills to promote that. I never would have thought that would have happened. I thought it was a couple of guys having a beer and complaining about Trudeau or whatever, So you're right. You just have to start doing something. That's all we did. There wasn't a huge plan when we started the channel. But it's turning into huge.
Yeah. So now you've got a wide reach to, basically educate people and encourage them to take personal responsibility, and also so they know they're part of a wider community, that they're not alone.
Yeah.
And what a beautiful thing, Jason. Yeah.
It is, yeah.
And it's just interesting for me to hear that you didn't anticipate it. I mean, I was not ever supposed to be in front of a camera at the NCI. Like, I viewed my role,
that's right.
I viewed my role like, I mean, I was just we have we call it the support group that kind of makes all the strategic decisions and manages it. And I just found that I had to jump in and do the lion's share of the organizing to get it off the ground. And I just viewed myself as, well, I'm kind of the behind the scenes guy, putting these teams together and getting things to happen. And one of the responsibilities I had to take on was arranging for lawyer teams to do the lawyering in the different cities, right? And then as we got closer to the events, like, you'd have a long list of people that had said they were interested, and then they just start dropping like flies. And then when others that philosophically would agree with what's going on and be happy, realizing, wait, this is a lot of work, because it's a lot of work. You got to prep the witnesses, right?
Yeah.
So then we're coming up to Toronto. On day one, we don't have a single lawyer. They've all dropped out. And on day two, we had one lawyer, and on day three, we had two lawyers. So I found myself all of a sudden having to do everyone on day one, and then we still had the same problem. So I ended up, but I never intended on ever being in front of the camera, but I think that God wanted me there.
He was pretty insistent.
Well, but you see, I didn't anticipate what would happen. Like, it's funny with the openings. Oh yeah, so day one there'll be an opening. Well, of course there'll be an opening. We're starting in Toronto. And so, that one I kind of gave some thought in too, and might have even gone over. And then I see there's an opening on day two, which, I had to just do between day one and day two. And so really just have an outline, right? Because I mean, you're still preparing the witnesses for the next hearing. And then also Winnipeg's the next week. So I'm having to prep those witnesses also. Like, it was just, you had no time, right? Like, what a dumb idea to do this weekly. Why wouldn't we put a week in between, right? Because you were always worried about the following week getting ready too, right? So day two, I give an opening, and then one of the commissioners, Heather, just makes a comment saying, I'm really liking those openings and looking forward to day three. And I think another commissioner commented too, and now I'm feeling pressure, right? And I think so now all of a sudden openings are becoming something that people are looking forward to. And then something was happening with, there's a place in the Bible, I don't even know where it is, where it basically says, don't worry about what you're going to say. And it means, when you're brought in front of, the magistrate and that, you're getting punished for being a Christian and maybe, put to death or something, like, just remember all the death and carnage. And, even today, I think we have probably more Christians being martyred every day than any time in history.
Yeah.
But it says, don't worry about what you're going to say. Basically just, trust and open your mouth and it'll come out, right? And so I just taken the position, okay, Holy Spirit, I'll let you do the talking and just make sure that I'm in the right place where that can happen. But, please tell me, give me an outline of where we're going. So there's kind of some idea. No way. No, like, maybe I would, just get the outline, eating breakfast type thing, and just be able to put it in legible. My handwriting's just awful, so I have to, I'll write things out, but then I'll have to transcribe it slowly, and I would just have time to finish that before I had to leave and go to the venue, right?
Yeah.
So I never actually even walked through it.
Yeah.
And but I think that's why it worked.
Yeah.
And then the closing was just, that just happened.
That's just Hail Mary, yeah.
So but what I experienced is God bringing us all together.
Yeah.
That's what I experienced.
Yeah.
And I hold on to that because it just, so God's wanting us to come together. He's wanting us to get out of fear. he's wanting us to realize we're not alone. He's wanting us to understand that we're going to have a cost.
Yeah.
But most importantly, he's wanting us to understand he's moving.
Yeah. I think that God's left the conversation on purpose, I think, over the last, well, many decades, right? To the point now, I mean, I don't know. Have you ever heard our prime minister even say like a good word about God or going to church or anything like that anymore? I can't think of him even giving lip service to it, you know, where it used to be kind of expected of politicians, even when you knew they were sleazebags, they used to at least talk about going to church and how good family is and stuff anymore. And yeah, so I think,
well, wasn't it the World Economic Forum is suggesting that the Bible be outlawed?
I missed that.
So
the least surprising thing I've heard all day, but
you're wrong on that. But I mean, it is interesting when, you know, because I wasn't taking God seriously for years and years. It was actually COVID that woke me up.
Yeah.
Because, you know, I find lots of things in the Christian faith inconvenient because you actually have to put God first and love people, right? So, but I just found I couldn't deny that there's evil.
Yeah.
And the satanic symbolism is like everywhere. Like, look at our last Commonwealth Games opening ceremony.
Oh, yeah, that was weird.
You know, the halftime show, the Super Bowl, like, just pick any big event.
Yeah.
And the satanic, I mean, the Commonwealth Games, they actually had people dressed up as slaves with big chains pulling the big golden calf, the symbol of Baal.
Yeah, yeah.
How does that happen? Like, it's not by accident. So it's just like everywhere. And I had to realize, okay, well, if Satan's real,
yeah, I better get with the good guy. Yeah.
Then God and Jesus are real. And then it's like, oh, okay, I gotta take some personal responsibility here. As you know, as inconvenient as that is.
Agreed.
And I'm just joking because, you know, once you do, you realize, no, this is the better way. So
yeah. And I think there's an armor to faith. Why we see so many faithful among the crowd that is resistant to these stories. I think you get an armor with at least some acknowledgement of a higher power and faith in the fact that there's something bigger than you. Where for atheists, the only thing bigger than them is the government. And they fooled themselves into thinking they don't need faith, but everyone needs faith, just that their atheism has become the faith, you know? And to me, that seems like nothingness. And so I choose the latter. But like you say, I've always been kind of more secular in my approach to God. I find things get so complicated once all the humans get involved, arguing over church rituals and what's allowed and how literal do you take the Bible, and these people are doing it wrong and these people are doing it right. Keeps me away from it, but I've never lost faith, and it's stronger than ever now. I'm more out about it now than maybe back more like I was back in the day, which is good. It's part of this journey. This is bringing out the best in all of us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of prodigal sons.
yeah. I think you're right.
So, I think the differences are becoming meaningless. Like, I think things are changing. I think on the other end of this, you know, things are just going to be different.
Yeah.
And, you know, wouldn't like, because really all that matters is who we are when we're finished.
Yeah.
Like, you know, I think the most important prayer for anyone is, God, help me to finish well.
Yeah.
Like, help me to be the person that I would be most proud of any point of my life at the end. And we don't know when the end is. But I think that's a great prayer, because, you know, we all, you know, if your thoughts and your feelings could just be broadcast onto a movie screen for everyone to see, you know, and we just went through your thoughts and feelings, you know, through your life, we'd all go and live in the forest for the rest of our lives and never
right.
see another human being again.
Yeah.
Until we realize that would be the case for all of us, right?
Yeah.
It's just who we are, and it's okay. We can just decide to be different, and it's okay, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Like, that's the beautiful thing is,
yeah,
it's okay. We're all the same. And that actually helps us be more understanding, because when we get to the other side, we can't be vengeful.
Yeah.
And we actually have to set an example like we could not imagine ourselves doing in the darkness, when we were all mad and all scared and all wanted vengeance. There has to be justice.
Yeah.
But we have to do it in a sense of peace and non-vengeance. There's a difference between justice and vengeance, because we have to set the tone of what we want this society to look like for the next century.
Yeah.
And I think it's going to be one of our challenges. But I think if we start understanding that we've got to have a peaceful spirit for our own sakes.
Yeah.
Because what would then happen is we get our institutions back, we go too far, and then we have to carry that.
Just continue the cycle. Then those that we persecute will be mad and wait for their turn to get the chains back. And
no, we just it got off the rails. We all got put under a spell, I think, literally, and when we fully wake up, we're going to act like we're woken up.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah.
So, in closing, I think everybody watching, you have homework. Figure out what you're going to be personally responsible for and start doing it. Does that sound right?
I couldn't say better.
Yeah. Okay, great. Well, I think we'll call it there. Thank you very much for joining us.
Well, thank you, Jason, for doing this, because it's where you found yourself doing what you're supposed to be doing. And so I thank you. And it's not without a cost. You're putting yourself out there, and it's tons of work and tons of organization. And I know you work really hard at it. So I thank you for doing what you're doing.
You bet. I'm going to end the recording now.
These films take time to make. Support our efforts by joining us at locals.com.